welcome back to another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. As promised, Nick Farabaugh will still be joining the show from time to time, despite no longer being with Steelers now. Here he is right now, Nick Farabaugh. How we doing, pal?
We're doing well, Smitty. We're doing well on this fine Wednesday. It's good, man. Week before training camp, the vibes are the vibe, the feeling is starting to come back, if you will. Football's almost here, and so I'm looking forward to it, man. And a lot of rain might be coming, just like it is
A lot of
today.
rain might be
So
coming. Yeah. We got a lot of rain here for the first time in a long time. Even some flooding on the sidewalks here in good old Beaver County. So, yeah, we were looking at the forecast ahead for training camp next week. Looks like that could certainly be in the cards as well. The high temperatures, but I feel like we've kind of gotten used to that over the course of this summer anyway. So we'll see. I will be at training camp a week from Saturday and Sunday, helping Alan out down at training camp. That Saturday will mark 1 year of Steelers Afternoon Drive. So that's kind of why I was planning on going there anyway. So very excited for that. Very excited to see you, all the other friends that I have that cover the team, and of course, some of our guys. So Nick, appreciate you taking the time to join the show. We had to put out, of course, some questions. Did a little bit of a mailbag episode going on here. And I think one of the players that people want to talk about. I know that you got a new podcast, by the way, on your new venture over there. So be sure to check that out. What's the name of it again, Nick?
Steelers Breakdown, yeah.
Steelers Breakdown with Nick Farabaugh, so be sure to go check that out. But very first episode that you dropped, of course, you had to talk about Brandon Aiyuk. We thought maybe I didn't think this saga was completely over by any means, but certainly when he finally formally does request a trade, we hadn't gotten to that part of the process yet. That did take place over the last 48 hours. So with that happening, where's your mind at on this? I feel like, again, it doesn't necessarily change my mind a whole lot, but it is another step. If you want this situation to become really ugly, really tenuous, this was going to have to happen along the way.
Yeah, it's like one of the steps that needed to happen, right? We're on like step 3 of like 6 now. There's still I was telling people this. I just don't think he has a lot of leverage. I really don't.
Yeah.
Ayuk's doing what he can to make this ugly and get as much leverage as he can to force the Niners to crack. But he doesn't have a ton. For one, he's under contract. I mean, he literally is under his 5th-year deal this year.
That's the thing that I feel like people are it's the 5th-year option, not the tag. So like it's not the same situation as like a T Higgins or some of these other receivers that
Right.
we've seen tagged in the past. It's a 5th-year option.
Those guys can hold out with no cost. If you haven't signed your tag, you're not getting fined. So doesn't matter, but he will get fined at training camp if he doesn't show up. And I mean, clearly, if he's requesting a trade, I don't expect him to show up for when the veterans report for the 49ers. I wouldn't expect that. I mean, listen,
So is that
that's the
step
next
4?
step. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the next step, right? And then, I mean, the red button option is we get close to week 1 and he pulls what Chris Jones did last year. I mean, Chris Jones legitimately was willing to miss games. And that's what forced the Chiefs to break their hand and actually give him, they didn't give him a true new deal right out of the chute. He got, a reworked kind of deal. And then eventually that came. But I don't know what would satisfy Ayuk at that point. If he's willing to sit out week 1, for example, would the 49ers crack? I don't know. But that's his biggest leverage. But we know, Zach, that it's risky business holding out like that to not play games because we've seen in the past how much that has hurt guys. You can't like Ayuk's. I don't think ever going to pull a Le'Veon Bell. I just don't see a situation where he just sits out the whole year. It doesn't make much sense to me for him to do it. So he's not got a ton of leverage. And then the missing part of this that everyone's missing is that the 49ers can easily just slap the tag on him next offseason. I mean, they really can. I know that they're up against the cap, but they can shed bigger contracts next year. Ayuk's one of their younger superstars on the ascent. Brock Purdy's going to get his deal, but the franchise tag's not crazy. Who's to say the plan isn't to let Ayuk play out on the deal this year and then trade Debo next year? I just think that makes so much sense. It really does when you think about how Debo's style, as he's going to get older, is going to decline just because he plays so physical and he gets hurt a lot. Ayuk is a better man coverage beater and kind of makes the offense work, honestly. He's kind of their best man coverage beater, and it's not really close. I mean, he's a guy that does a little bit of everything. So it's really hard for me to buy into this idea that, Aiyuk has a ton of leverage. He's trying. I think he gains more leverage if, maybe an injury happens, a significant one, training camp. That can certainly change the calculus. But right now, the 49ers are saying they're not going to trade him, and they really don't have much of an incentive to do that. So, I mean, that's where I'm at, man. What we can get past that, we can start talking, would the Steelers pay him? Would they trade a first round pick? But I have a hard time getting past the very first step, which is the 49ers actually wanting to trade Brandon Aiyuk.
Sure. Yeah, and I feel like we've had the same conversation so many times. So let's pivot away from that part of it. And the second part that you just mentioned right there, the Steelers side of things, in terms of acquiring him, both compensation to the 49ers and then compensation to Brandon Aiyuk on a new deal. You'd have to think, like, if they're even engaging in these talks, trying to pry him out of San Francisco, they have to be comfortable with the contract that they would have to give him, or at least the prospective one, like looking at the market saying, okay, we would do this for this player. But so maybe they're there in terms of the new contract, but and I don't know, San Francisco probably doesn't want to trade him anyway. I could almost see Pittsburgh being more willing to do that, but I don't know about the draft compensation to do so.
I don't know. So here's the thing. First round wide receivers are not a commonality in Steelers history.
Sure.
But when you look at recent history of first round receivers, dude, the hit rate is really good. Like, you look at the first round receivers. Let's just go from, say, 2020 back to 2023. We're not going to include 24 because obviously those guys haven't played a game. Mm-hmm. All right, here's 2020. Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Reagor, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Aiyuk himself. I mean, what's the hit rate on that? Would you say 3 out of 6, 4 out of 6? Jeudy kind of flips depending.
3.25, 3.5. Yeah, right? Jeudy's
a good player, but is he a first round player? Probably not.
I mean, he got paid like a
obviously
like a
Ruggs, the off the field stuff hit, but honestly, with the way Ruggs was starting to play that year, it seemed like he was trending towards a hit too. Obviously before the DUI crash and everything happened. So here's the next year. Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Kadarius Toney, Rashad Bateman. I'd say 3 out of 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and Bateman could make it.
Bateman's a useful
got a second
player.
contract.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can do that calculus. He's been hurt a lot, hasn't played a ton. So it depends on what you do, but at worst, that's a 3 out of 5, probably 3.5, 4, depending on how you bait. The next year is Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jamison Williams, Jahan Dotson, Treylon Burks. Burks is the obvious miss of that group, but everyone else, Dotson and Williams haven't had the production come just yet. Williams has had moments of brilliance. Dotson, same thing. I think the top 3 are clear hits, though.
Yeah.
The next year after that, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison. At least 3 out of the 4 are hits right now. Johnston had a bad year 1, but the other 3 are hits into year 1. I mean, dude, the hit rate on those guys is significant. You look at, if you have a top half of the first round pick, you seemingly hit on a wide receiver in the since 2020. I mean, that really is impressive. Now you go into the back half, I think you start missing more. You have the Tonys, the Burks, Reagor, guys that are more you can miss on. If you go back to 2019, for example, you don't have a ton of receiver talent in that draft. You only had 2, and both of them were in the back half of the first. It was Hollywood Brown and N'Keal Harry. Harry, obviously a miss. Hollywood, I would say, is a hit for where he was picked. So, I mean, really, dude, first-round receivers have a really high hit rate. There's just a lot of receiver talent. So, could you draft a receiver that is equal, maybe not as good as Brandon Aiyuk, but could be 85% of him and cheap? Could. I think you have to consider that calculus in the argument. But here's where I personally put the Steelers into a possibility where you can actually pull this off. If they are looking at where they think they're going to be in the first round, I would say they're going to be picking in the 20s. Right? They think they're going to make the playoffs, maybe win a game or 2. That's a realistic expectation for that team. So you would think if you're trading 25, the calculus is a little different. Yes, again, in that back half of the first round, it gets a little murkier in that wide receiver draft profile. So maybe you don't want to take a chance. I haven't even really explored the wide receiver talent in the next class, to be quite honest with you. So I'm not sure how deep or how shallow that pool is. But if you look at that back half, you can find anything from a superstar to a guy that isn't even in the NFL in 3 years. I mean, it's really that volatile at the back end. So I think, you could work the math there to trade for Ayuk. And I don't think, 30 million isn't a crazy ask. And I think, Smitty, the one thing everyone ignores is they only focus on the Steelers trading for it. If Ayuk's legitimately available for trade, the Raiders are going to be in on him. The Patriots are going to be on him. The Commanders are going to be on him. I'm sure the Chiefs are going to call. I'm sure all these other teams that we talk about are going to be
Chargers.
calling about him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say, teams don't want to trade a first round pick, but the Raiders are willing to part with their second. They're taking the Raiders second over the Steelers second 100 times out of 100. So it might cost the Steelers their late first if that's what they think it's going to be. So I'm just working the math with that, kind of what I think is going to end up happening. So the avenue is probably going to be a first round pick and pay him 30. I mean, that's probably what it's going to be. They don't technically have any long term commitments on the offensive side of the ball. Daniel seems like he's going to walk. Najee, we've talked about Najee's contract situation. Warren will probably get extended. I think he's probably the next, a guy that will be part of the long-term future. Pickens, I mean, we'll see, right? I think if Pickens has another really good year, he's probably in line for one. And then Freiermuth, we'll see what happens. But like the O-line has no one really coming up. Quarterback obviously doesn't seem like a one where there's, at least right now, a certain guy that you're going to be paying. So you can definitely swing the first round pick plus 30 mil for Ayuk. It's just about going to be about how much you value that star receiver, how much you think about your hit rate. The Steelers historically have obviously had a great hit rate on wide receiver picks. So it all of that calculus comes in, but he would give them a bona fide star, a bona fide superstar, to be quite honest with you. I think Ayuk is one of the 10 best receivers in the NFL. So he would give them a bona fide superstar on offense. And they don't really have a definite one yet.
I agree. I don't think that we are close to San Fran trading him, despite him requesting a trade for everything that you just said, everything that he can do for that offense, for any offense, really. But it's funny because you were just talking about extension candidates there. One of the questions, we can just go to this now because this is a great pivot. Lord Megatron's op says, do you think the Steelers will at least extend 2 players before or during training camp? Two is an interesting number to throw in there. I think at least one. The second one,
I think.
Do we think something gets done with Cam? Like
they have so many contracts up that you need some sort of security somewhere on the roster. Like your running back one, basically the whole wide receiver room aside from Pickens and Austin and Wilson, right? So you're gonna have those guys, Daniels, Moore, Freiermuth. I mean, it's just a lot. Cam and Dante Jackson and Casey and there's just Roberts. I mean, there's so many names that you think of that are just expiring deals. So they have a ton of them, both the quarterbacks, obviously. So there's a lot of expiring deals. So you think you would want some type of clarity before next year's off season? Because what if someone has a great year? What if they want to extend Najee after this year? He has a great year and they want to get that done before he hits the market, or they Cam Hayward, maybe they don't get Cam Hayward done. He has another resurgent year. They want to get him done before he hits the mark. I mean, these are very realistic scenarios that could happen. So I think you have to extend probably 2 guys. Which 2 guys I think is the biggest question. It seems like Daniels is out of the equation. He's basically said they weren't going to talk to him.
I think
Cam
the same with Najee.
Cam didn't seem optimistic at all. He seems like he's the second in line. I think they want Najee back, but I don't know why Najee would accept a deal. From less than what his 5th-year option was, because why would the Steelers pay more than the 5th-year option? So the math isn't great. Maybe, I mean, Alandon Roberts feels like a guy they let test the market and then maybe sign him back. It's hard to find, who's going to be that one. Freiermuth, can make sense for sure if they want to get that tight end room kind of logged up. But I mean, there's only so many guys, and I don't buy. I personally don't buy the Russell Wilson, Justin Fields extension stuff in training camp.
No, I
I
don't
think you're going
either.
to let
Yeah,
them play it out.
I agree. I'm thinking. I mean, you know where I'm at with Fryermuth. I think that one is going to happen. That's just a prediction, by the way. I feel like I have to put that out there. The other one, you mentioned Jalen Warren. Like, I could see something there. Like, I think that they would like to reward him and not continue. Like, look at how much money. I know that he appealed and obviously got some of that taken off and things like that. But like, dude was playing for free at times last year. I think that they would like to reward that and not have to make him play on that UDFA RFA contract. So those are my two predictions.
Yeah, that's actually not even like it's funny because that's not an exaggeration. He was actually playing free at
Yeah,
times last year. So yeah, I mean, you could look. Warren is interesting. And basically, I mean, he's an RFA next year, so they really don't have to do it, but it would
right.
be a show of loyalty. I
Hmm.
don't know if you let's say your Frymuth prediction is correct. I still
Hmm.
think the natural second one is probably Cam. I just
Yeah,
it's hard. I know this is a new regime and everything, but when you are that guy, when you are Cam Hayward, and you've been the heart and soul of the Steelers locker room for, at this point, it's been 5, 6 years that he's been, the leader of the defense, man. It's really hard for me to see them severing that tie. I just the
yeah.
price has got to be right, but it it it's going to be tough for me to predict them moving on. I think if you think two happen, I think he's the second one, but I mean, it's very realistic that only one happens. I think. I don't think that's wholly unrealistic.
Yeah, and again, I want like just a prediction. So it's completely within the realm of possibility that zero happen. This is just if we're predicting what is going to take place here with how many guys that they have that are extension eligible, something's got to give. Um, Ryan Kellerman wants to know 3 training camp position battles you guys are looking forward to. Example, Moore and Fatanu. And specifically for Nick, 3 guys who will surprise us and have great camps.
So 3 battles I'm looking forward to. I think I'm really looking forward personally uh to what happens at slot corner. I think that with
Yeah.
Cam Sutton suspended 8 games, that's a really fun. There's names in there, man. Like Beanie Bishop. That's exciting. And you have some vets to where you can see what happens. I'm just excited to see how they mix that in. How much free safety they play, kind of different things that you'll see. Wide receiver is obviously the other one. Let's say they don't trade for a receiver, who steps up? Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Scotty Miller, all these names. Who steps up? That's going to be a really big one. And I mean, I think the third one has to be the tackle position for me, at least, just because how quickly does Troy Falatanu come along? I think that's a big one. And where they put Broderick Jones and relative to getting Troy Falatanu experience against T.J. Watt and Alex Highsmith, those guys, I think that'll be my 3 to watch. That I'm excited for at least.
Just thinking about one-on-one matchups here. That's the way that I want to kind of approach this
Okay.
question. Patrick Queen versus Jalen Warren, backs on backers. Dante Jackson and Calvin Austin, speed versus speed. I know Dante Jackson probably isn't that same, high 4.2, low 4.3 guy, but I think that he's still very fast, and I want to see that speed go against the speed. And then Keanu Benton and Zach Frazier, couple of wrestlers, couple of maulers. I want to see
Okay.
that battle take
I like
place.
that. So 3 guys I think that will surprise in
Yeah.
camp. Interesting question. Okay. I think one guy that's going to end up getting a little bit more talk than people probably end up thinking is going to probably end up being Darius Rush. I think, people are talking about Trice a lot, and I think Rush can get lost in the shuffle a little bit, but he had a pretty good spring. He was a raw player, so he's going to make a leap. This is the first offseason to really show off that leap. So I think he could be a guy to really watch. Man, we had some DBs that were really good in the spring. Nate Metters had a nice spring.
Yeah.
That could be a surprising name. Beanie Bishop had an awesome.
Alan talked about him a lot, but both those guys,
Yeah,
Metters
I
and
think
Beanie Bishop.
I've elevated Beanie from not surprised status anymore just because I've talked about him so much. Same thing with like Calvin Austin. I just talked about Calvin so much. Calvin Austin was legitimately awesome in the spring. So I'm interested there. A second name I think is Des Fitzpatrick. I do think he'll get some. I really do. I like Des Fitzpatrick because he's the guy that does the grime when no one else wants to. He blocks. He makes the tough catches over the middle. He's sure-handed. He his special teams acumen, a gunner, kick coverage, whatever it might be. He gets after it and he makes plays in these camp settings, man. Like he does extra work. He just makes plays and he made his way, on the practice squad last year. I think if there's a sleeper fifth guy in this room that makes it, it's him because I think he can bring special teams value that really no one else can. So I really like that. And then the third guy, I don't think he's been talked about enough, but he could be in line for a bigger role. Is Dylan Cook? I really
Yeah.
I liked Dylan Cook last year. Had a great camp. I thought he played decent in the preseason games. He could play four positions. If Falatanu ends up starting with Jones, I do think it opens up the possibility for that Dan Moore trade. And so if that happens, if Jones and Falatanu are going to be the week one starters and say they do move more, which I think is possible, I really think that guy's going to be stepping up as a swing tackle. And I think he can do it. I really think they have something there. He's a former quarterback, very intelligent. You look at his foot speed and his athleticism. He fits the scheme very well. So that's a guy that I'm really excited to see, how he stands out with another year under his belt. He's still very, very new to offensive line. So every year, man, it's like stacking a new brick on it. So I'm excited to see him. Those are probably my three guys.
You mentioned if there's a fifth receiver that's on the roster right now, but Jam wants to know what's more likely: Steelers pick up a wide receiver after 53-man roster cutdowns, or trade for a player in the secondary prior to the regular season.
So here's the thing. I think it's the receiver. I really do. You mean like a Desmond King type ad? I could see that. I I don't see them trading for a guy in the secondary. I think their secondary move was to go out and sign Cam Sutton. That was their move to fill slot. And I think the rest of the year it's going to be who can either fill it out, or if they're not happy with it, they'll go out and sign somebody in cutdowns. I mean, it's possible they sign a receiver and a corner in cutdowns.
Yeah. See, that's
They've
what I
done that
say is
before.
like the thing with this question to me is they said trade for a player in the secondary. I think it's completely possible they add another player in the secondary, but
I
I don't
agree.
think it would be via trade.
I mean, that could be a trade or a signing. They signed Desmond King, but remember, in his first year, Omar Khan traded for Jesse Davis and Malik Reed. So it can be done either way. It really can. You could swing picks and do different things like that. So either way, I think they probably added this receiver room in some way. Well, that's who we talked about in Brandon Aiyuk, or if it's just some cast off that they really like. I really think
We
that.
keep saying it, but like the Texans have like 8 NFL quality wide receivers.
Someone
So
is not making that team, and they're not keeping 8
yeah.
receivers. So, yeah, someone that maybe the Steelers like, might come out of that for the cheap, and that'd be interesting to see if they would pick that guy up. So I think they will add a receiver. I'm going to go wide receiver here, but I think it's entirely possible that they add both. I could see another player in the secondary and a wide receiver come down in those cut down periods.
Yeah. Same. Cam wants to know, is Mark Robinson fighting for a 53-man roster spot? What's your take on Mark Robinson? Haven't really talked about him a ton. You know, normally I would say kind of hard to find the spot for a fifth inside linebacker, but we don't know what's going to happen with Cole Holcomb. I think the new kickoff and kick return roles kind of open spots for guys that you wouldn't necessarily think about. Mark Robinson, I thought, had some flashes towards the back end of last year. So what's your take on Mark Robinson and his prospects to make his 53?
He's got to prove the fifth linebacker spot is more valuable than another spot that they could have on the roster. That's what he's got to do. He's clearly, to me, the fifth best inside linebacker on the team. It's just, do they carry 4 or 5? Which I think is an interesting question. So here's the thing. Cole Holcomb isn't going to play special teams when he comes back. E-Rob might. Peyton Wilson almost certainly will. So, you look at those two and they do have some special teams value. But if they want to rotate these guys, which they're probably going to play all 4 of those guys. They're going to play Queen, Roberts, Holcomb, and Wilson. I would think you would want maybe 3 of those guys off the teams. That's what I would say. But Atlanta Roberts, do you want him on special teams? Do you want him going and covering kicks necessarily? Maybe not. I think Wilson's going to be a fixture on that. So Mark Robinson's going to have to prove, that he's more valuable than, say, I don't know, a fifth inside linebacker, um, a sixth receiver, something like that. He's going to have to make himself less expendable than those guys. So he's fighting for a spot for sure. He's on the roster, but I really don't know what to do with Mark Robinson. He's entering, I think, a pretty critical year for him, but I thought he also played probably the best ball of his career down the stretch last year. So he's an interesting player, but he's got to prove that fifth linebacker spot, inside linebacker spot, is more valuable than somewhere else. Because I look at roster construction right now, and it's the same thing with with four running backs. Okay, you want Dejan Edwards or Aaron Shanklin or Jonathan Ward or Lamichael Piron, someone to make the team there. Who's that fourth running back kicking off the roster? Because it's got to be someone. And so, Robinson's competing with all of that because I think they're keeping, four tight ends. They're going to keep only five receivers, three quarterbacks. There's all the math you go through. So he's going to have to make another spot expendable.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree, though. I mentioned that I thought Robinson played some pretty good ball down the stretch. There were certainly some moments on tape that popped off to me. And again, we've kind of talked about guys that are newer to the position and stuff. He played 1 year at linebacker before the Steelers drafted him. Like, he's so new to the position. Like, we were talking about Dylan Cook's transition from quarterback to tackle and how quickly that he's picked it up and he looks like an NFL player there. Mark Robinson, I feel like, has looked like an NFL player. I think he'll get an opportunity, whether that's, making the 53 for the Steelers as the fifth inside linebacker or somewhere else. I think he's an intriguing piece going forward.
Yeah, man. I like Mark Robinson. He's like a heat-seeking missile that does not care, but he's still a guy that is green. I mean, he came in very raw. He was this converted running back that basically just played like a bowling pin, and he got out of position sometimes. He would have bad eyes. It's gotten better, but it's not fully fixed yet. So we'll see. This camp is huge for him. I'm really interested to see how Mark Robinson competes in Latrobe. This is really important for him because with Arthur Smith's offense too, he's going to get more eye candy with play action, motion. Sure. So they'll see very quickly how good his eyes are.
Yeah, good point. And last thing here from Matt, the defense should be better with the additions. QB play has to be better. They won 10 games last year. Why are people sleeping on the Steelers? Not believing in Russ, harder schedule? I'm perplexed.
I've said this many times before. Like, anytime you are in the division with the strength of the North, I mean, the North is just stacked. These are four good rosters. I mean, they really are. And so teams, guys just look at the Steelers roster and they think it's the fourth best. Now, if that's your opinion, that's my opinion. It don't matter. But a lot of the betting odds guys or these big name analysts look at the Steelers roster and say they're the fourth best team in the North on paper. So it happens. And so that's why they sleep on them. And yeah, I agree. I think this roster is better than it was when they lost in Buffalo. I think quarterback's better. I think they'll be better on the O-line. Probably a little worse at receiver right now. I've said it before. I think if they add a receiver, that they'll be a better receiving group because the receiving group's going to be deeper this year. In terms of depth, I think it's deeper. I don't see the two, to match the Deontay Johnson stuff from last year. So I think it could be deeper than last year if you add somebody. They're better at corner. They're better at safety. They're better at linebacker. I mean, they're better. In so many different areas. They're better at punter. I mean, we talked about that. Like Cameron Johnston, man, is going to make a difference at punter. So they're better in a lot of different areas. They're better at OC. Arthur Smith's better than Matt Canada. So they're just better a lot of spots. So I agree. I think they're, very realistic to match 10-7. I also just look at last year and some of the games they won, and boy, were they fortunate to be 10-7. They had a lot of bounces go their way. The Ravens just forgetting to drop footballs all week, 1 week. I mean, it was crazy. And so, they probably got a little bit. They had a lucky horseshoe a little bit last year at times. This year, I don't think they're going to have to rely on that as much. But that still might, end up with them being 10-7 again. But doesn't mean this team wasn't better. So I agree. I think this is a better team. I think they could be better than 10-7. I think their schedule is certainly very janky. I know Allen, when it came out, was arguing about how it can be a strength for them, and having
Mhm.
all of that as their meshing the new. But I really look at it, and it really is a brutal stretch for them. With Hard
Sure.
Knocks too, so they're going to
Yeah.
have cameras filming everything. 6 divisional games, Chiefs, Eagles. I mean, it is a brutal stretch for them. But I think this team is better across the board. So theoretically, I mean, they should be 10-7 at least again. Obviously, it doesn't always play out like that in practice, but I do agree. I think people that are predicting them to go like 6-11, I think are a little bit off the rocker.
Yeah, you can find some sites where you can get their win total at 7.5 right now, and I think that that's pretty
Smash the over
crazy.
on that.
Yeah. But I agree with you. Derek and I actually had a little bit of a conversation about this on Monday's pod, where it's like you could look at the 2024 roster and say, oh, this team would beat the 2023 Steelers. But at the end of the day, by the time we get to the end of the season, they could also be 10-7, just like the 2023 Steelers were. Like, that's just how this thing goes sometimes. Like, it could look very different than how the 2023 Steelers got 10-7, but they could ultimately have the same record for a variable of reasons. You brought up the schedule. Obviously, the Bengals are going to have Joe Burrow back. Like, you can't predict
Yeah.
injuries, but on paper they should have him back. Like, there's so many variables that play into this. Do think they're a better team? Will their record reflect it? TBD.
Right. Injuries pop up all the time, right? I mean, some of those games the Steelers lost last year, they were playing with a skeleton secondary with a mishmash together linebacking room. I mean, so it's interesting. The Steelers last year I thought were a very flawed roster across the board. I think this year they're definitely stronger. They definitely still have flaws. I mean, you can point it out, slot corner. I think interior D line, how dominant that interior D line can be. Cam's another year older. Can Ogunjobi bounce back, et cetera, et cetera. Wide receiver, obviously. How
Mhm.
quickly can Russ and Smith and the O line and everybody mesh? I think that's another big thing. But like the talent level is better. I just think the upgrades they've made, even
Yeah.
if you think the upgrades are going from terrible to say just okay,
Yeah.
it's still
Marginal.
better.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah, let me last thing, and this just kind of popped in my head is like Tomlin, obviously the great equalizer. Like, you can say whatever you want about the ceiling where this team reaches, but I certainly think that he elevates the floor. So with that being said, like, how do you equate that? Where do you weight that in this conversation in terms of where the Steelers stand along with the rest of the AFC North, maybe having the least talented roster?
I think it's a fair argument. I mean, the bank. Listen, a lot of these teams do have holes. I don't think it's any
Hmm.
team's perfect in the division. I think the Bengals and the Ravens do get a benefit not only because their rosters are good, but because Lamar and Joe Burrow exist. Whereas the Browns, I don't think necessarily get as much of a benefit. I do like the Browns roster though. They have a nice backfield tandem. Nick Chubb's gonna be back. Receiver room is what it is. Cooper, Judy, and Moore is a fine receiving room. I like Cooper, but the other two are okay. Um, they have a good O line. They're better in the trenches this year on the defensive side of the ball. Their interior D line is really good. Secondary is still really good. So they're a good team. But the quarterback situation, that's been equalized, I think, to a degree now. You can easily see a season where Russell Wilson and Justin Fields is better than Deshaun Watson. I don't think that's
Hmm.
crazy
Yeah.
at all to think. And the Steelers have just eased the talent gap, whereas the Steelers clearly, for example, had the worst tackle duo in the division last year. Now it theoretically isn't going to be that. Whereas they had the clearest, slowest secondary in the division last year. They have now gotten faster. They added a star at the second level in Queen. So even if you consider the Steelers the fourth best roster, and I think that's a fair thing. I think they're third or fourth. That's where I think in terms of roster, they're third or fourth. Even if you consider them fourth best in the North, last year it was probably like this. This year is probably more like that. Like they shortened the gap, so it's negligible at this point. So that's where I fall on that. So they're not going to get just fully out talented on the football field. Out, I don't think they're going to. I think last year at times some teams like the Texans game, for example, where Stroud
Yeah.
and that group just ran wild on them. That team just had better athletes on the offensive side of the ball than the Steelers did on defense. Like that's was a big part of that. They just could not match the athleticism that Houston brought. I don't think that's going to happen this year. Steelers are fast at the second level. Dante Jackson obviously is fast. I know Deshaun Knight didn't run like a blazing 40, but you look at his game speed, he's fast, takes good angles, makes good tackles. So they're going to be able to match that. And so the talent level, the athleticism level is all decreased, even if you consider them, say, number 4 in the North.
Right. Gotcha. All right. I think that's it. Real good stuff, Nick. Not the same place that people can find you now. So as always, I am going to have to ask you where the people can find you, but you have a different answer this time.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to have on my Twitter. You can find me on Twitter,
Right.
X at Farabaugh FB. You can read my stuff over at Penn Live. Got stuff coming over, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Steelers Breakdown coming every day. So Smitty will be on that at some point. So will Alan. So will
Is that like a revamp? Are you like revamping that YouTube channel or something?
Yeah,
Like, was
we
it
are.
something
We
before?
are.
And I was just saying, because I went and watched the podcast you put out yesterday, and it was like the most recent thing was 5 years ago prior to
Yeah,
that. And I was
man.
like,
Yeah, so we're revamping that whole thing. So more to come. But yeah, the Steelers Breakdown podcast is the first step in that. And so I'm really excited to get that going. And as I said, yeah, guests are coming on. Smitty will be one. We'll have Alan on when Alan's back from the beautiful shores of New Jersey. So
yeah,
we'll have all of that going.
there you go. So be sure to head over there, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell over there as well. Hit us in the comments with any questions, your thoughts on anything that we talked about. Leave us a 5-star review and subscribe if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. You can find Steelers Afternoon Drive. Also hit us up on TikTok if you're over there. Get 90-second clips of the show. Find me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH. For Nick Farabaugh and myself, thanks for jumping in. Take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.